What is the purpose of learning chemistry in our society today? It might not seem like the most original question to start off this course, but let's make space for an aspect of learning that doesn't get talked about as much as I believe it should be, the social aspect. Because while it is true that the rigorous science we ask all students to learn in the US has brought us far into creating tools for transportation and healing in our society, certain aspects result in unsustainable tools when mass produced. And when we look at different socioeconomic populations, those that suffer the negative consequences of these developments, unfortunately, might not surprise you. Saludos, this is Mr. Giovanni, and today we're going to be making a commitment as a learning community to be radical learners of science. And I promise you, this is not just some fancy way to make science sound a little more interesting, but to explain further, I want to start off the year by looking at some context around science to consider the following questions. What do new scientific ideas do to those in power and the status quo? The way things are taken for normal. Today we take things like the atom is the most basic unit of matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed as obvious, boring even, common sense, just as common sense as getting a good paying job to be happy, and the fact that the earth revolves around the sun. Okay, that last one still seems to be debated for whatever reason. But what I mean by radical starts with a related word, critical, in that we stop to think, wait, how exactly did we get here? Were these ideas always taken for granted and as true? And if not, how do we even normalize them? Example 1 is the 1500s in Italy, and people were for the most part past flat earth theories, but the model of the solar system with a few adjustments from what we know today. At the time, they believed it was the sun that orbited the earth instead of the other way around, Copernicus's heliocentric or sun-centered model we're familiar with today. It might seem like this is a small detail that can be fixed by a simple frame of reference explanation, but the reason why this was so controversial for people like Giordano Bruno, an Italian scientist, was that this geocentric worldview became ingrained in Christian theology, making it a doctrine of religion as much as natural philosophy. Science then was limited by the beliefs of those in power and how things should be, and the consequences for those that protested these type of arguments. Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for teaching a heliocentric solar system. Fast forward to example 2. It's 2011 and food engineer Bülent Schick was a team leader for a project to look for contaminants in water and produce as a potential cause for high cancer rates in northwest industrial cities in Turkey. Between 2013 and 2015, the team found 52 locations where drinking water had dangerous levels of lead, aluminum, and arsenic, which have been linked to cancer, and that almost a fifth of the food sample contained pesticides above the legal limit. Driven by a scientific responsibility to explain those results and share them with the public, Schick joined representatives from other projects to make them public. But the Ministry of Health never released information, and in 2018, Schick instead published his findings in the national newspaper Cumhuriyet. The response? Government officials sued Schick for distributing confidential information, and in September 29 hearing, he was sentenced to 15 months in prison. And finally, example 3. It's 2020, and among the mainly crazy things our country has to deal with is an ongoing debate about climate change. Seeing students organize to express the urgency of a more renewable future is one of the most motivating things to witness as a science teacher. Oh my gosh. Okay. Seeing students organize to express the urgency of a more renewable future is one of the most motivating things to witness as a science teacher, and it makes me that much more disappointed in the stubbornness of the country's leadership when dealing with these issues. Specifically, environmental concerns are more difficult to access simply because it's more difficult to access that information. From changing the language of the current executive cabinet uses to discuss environmental issues, to burying web pages in archives and making them even more difficult to find, the current approach to even addressing climate change is in itself an insidious but relevantly consequential example of how people in government can hinder public engagement with science. Now, please keep in mind, my intention is not to demonize, in these examples, people who refuse to accept different scientific explanations, but rather draw out a clear pattern when science seems to have a serious and sometimes fundamental effect on how things are in our material world, they can and often are met with resistance when they challenge the power of ruling institutions. So why even bring up these examples? How does this relate to chemistry? Well, much of the reason these struggles are difficult to realize is due to the specific way we've come to perceive science. Science in its traditional language, its system, etc. often convey directly or indirectly that it is something rigid, something monolithic, and quote, it is what it is, school of thought that often is in service of the current state of the country, our economic system, the government, and the logistics of life. Now, there are certain patterns that scientists across generations have used to create robust theories to predict and design the society we share today. But even these can be part of an incomplete picture we don't know is incomplete, and some of the most hugely influential discoveries come from challenging these assumptions that we can't help but just feel just are true. At the end of the day, science, like our identities, how we perceive others, particularly those that are different from us, and our values, is socially constructed. Just like a picture might capture objective information in the form of an image, questions like who took this picture, for what purpose, for what audience, and what are they choosing or not choosing to leave out, reveal that there are human, social-driven reasons for taking that exact picture. And because of science we will learn, and yes, I am committed to guiding our class to use language, math, and other tools commonly used in the chemistry community, is also shaped by human motivations. It is crucial for us to also keep these potential social reasons in mind. For as much as science is used today as fixed procedures and rules, it continues to develop in the context of a social world with social tensions. There is another thing too that I must bring up, and it is the demographics of the people who study science, and definitely chemistry. And this is where I have to be honest about my own experience studying chemistry in high school and college, because as I got deeper in my studies, it became more and more apparent that there are just not as many brown people, particularly from low-income and migrant backgrounds, studying chemistry and physics as there should be. I've been in labs where I was the only person of color, and it can be very disorienting in a space where people talk about techniques and chemical names, physical names with a lot of ease. But in my journey, I learned something even more special, that there is a unique beauty in the people that gave me the confidence to understand that discomfort of feeling out of place is a testament to the power of socially transforming that specific space and bringing something that no one else in that room could bring. Your perspective, cultivado de un amor humilde y fuerte. So when it comes to our class, and it is likely that it will challenge you, I will make it my top priority that you feel just as much support for you to feel comfortable in this community. We are learning in this together, and more important than the right answers is consistently giving ourselves the opportunity to think genuinely and critically about how our shared universe works, and learn radically in a world that needs change. That's it for today's video, everyone. Thank you for watching. We'll be focusing on community building this week, and to that end, there's a quick I am from poem I made in case you want to learn more about Mr. Giovanni. But otherwise, make sure you are working on level 3's assignment in the form of a Google Doc, which is due by Friday, and are ready to join our first Zoom class meeting. I'm excited to come together, and in the meantime, stay radical, y'all.